came across this camcorder on Amazon.com. It's the Sereer HDV-501. It's listed as FHD 1080p camcorders, Wi-Fi connection, 60 FPS, dual SD slot, night vision, external battery, 20 megapixel, 16 times digital zoom, 3-inch touchscreen camera. And currently it's the #1 new release in the camcorders category on Amazon.com, and the current price as of when I'm recording this is $115 with free shipping. So I decided to get it, and for some reason on the box it just says Sere, doesn't say Sereer. They left off the ER on the end. And if you think this box design looks awfully familiar, you're right. It's basically a copy of the design Sony was using for their camcorder boxes about 5 years ago. So you can see it's basically just a rip-off of the Sony design. And even the camera itself looks very similar to some of the older Sony cameras. So this is the Sereer HDV-501. Lists the supplied accessories there. Lists LED. I guess that's a 3.0-inch TFT touchscreen. Has an SD card slot and 1600 something. I don't know what that's talking about. Claims to be a PAL version. I don't know if that's actually true. I'll have to see if it records 25 or 30 frames per second. Although the listing clearly states 60 frames per second, which would be NTSC. And it has this old battery logo on it, which is exactly what Sony used about 15 years ago. So they're really copying Sony's design here. But let's crack open this box here. See what we get inside. Oh, even there it says in the Handycam handbook, so they forgot to remove that reference to Handycam. We get an HDMI cable. Our user's manual lists some of the features here. Here it actually mentions infrared night vision function with IR cut double optical filters. And it goes through the controls. I'll go over the camera later once I get out of the box. So at a quick glance, the manual looks okay. I don't see any obvious English or stuff like that. So not too bad of a manual. Got our driver CD, which claims to include Magic's Video Easy SE, which is a really cut down version of the Magic's video editor software. And let's see, piece of foam here. We get a USB cable. We get a charger. Quick charger, claims to put out 1 amp at 5 volts. We get a battery, which has a fake ActiveForce logo on it. For comparison, here's a real ActiveForce battery on one of my Sony Handycams. Claims to be 1200 milliamp hours at 3.8 volts. And we get a standard AV cable with only mono audio, which will be interesting to see if this records mono or stereo. And finally, in this pouch with the typical DV Cam logo on it that all these Chinese camcorders seem to use, is the camcorder itself, which is actually not too bad. There it says 3-inch touchscreen Wi-Fi night shot, which I believe is still a Sony trademark, so they really shouldn't be using that. And 2 SD card slots. It looks like it has regular SD and micro SD. CMOS sensor support up to 32 gig SD card and full HD 1080p. And even on the camcorder itself, it just Sere instead of Sereer. So who knows what the real brand name is. It's purple, which I wasn't expecting. It looks dark gray or black in the photo on Amazon.com. There's no lens cap. You can see how far down that lens is, and all this is just decoration. Here are the 2 LEDs. I assume they're both infrared LEDs. Looks like it has stereo microphones, but maybe only one actually has a microphone in it. And we got our zoom lever up here for the digital zoom, a photo button, and a mode button. On the back, we get our recording button. On this side, we got our hand strap. Looks like the speakers on there. And on the bottom, lists a completely different model number than what it shows on Amazon.com. Here it says HDV-501 SDR. Made in China, of course. And here are the SD card slot. Although it looks like it's just a regular SD slot. I don't see a micro SD slot in there. Alright, let's open up here. Under this door is the AV output, USB port, and HDMI port. And we get a whole bunch of... Oh, there's the micro SD card slot. Okay, so it does have dual SD card slots. Various buttons here, and the LCD, which claims to be a touchscreen. So let me put on this battery and see if I can get it powered up. Funny thing is, a real Sony battery fits on it, but the connections are different, so it doesn't work. If you push this little icon here, it goes into night vision mode, and you can see those infrared LEDs light up. You can also push this button here to switch between infrared and normal modes. If we go into the menu, it has options for 1080p 30 frames per second, 720p 60 frames per second, and 720p 30 frames per second. But I'll be using 1080p 30 frames per second for my test footage. Some options here for video quality: super fine, fine, or normal. I'll leave it set to super fine. Seamless recording is more like if it's being used as a dash cam, where it splits the clips into 1 or 3 or 5 minute segments, but you can leave that off. White balance and metering, and effect, which is just the typical black and white and sepia and stuff like that. It does have options for either 50 or 60 hertz flicker reduction, and you can change the TV output from NTSC to PAL. It came set to PAL, so I guess when the box says PAL, that just means what it comes set to as default, but you can change it. Of course, it's digital zoom only, and it's a fixed focus lens with no macro mode, so you can't do close-ups. Everything on this is glossy, so it's going to attract fingerprints. Even the battery has a glossy finish. So that's about it for the controls. Nothing recorded on it yet, so I'll do some test recordings with the Sereer or the Sere HDV-501. So here is the Sereer or Sere HDV-501 recording under bright indoor lighting in normal mode in 1080p. When I first started using this camcorder, the infrared blocking filter was malfunctioning and causing everything to look purple in normal mode because it was not blocking infrared light from coming into the sensor. But after I started using it for a while, the filter started working normally, so now the colors look correct in normal mode. So if you have that problem with yours, just go back and forth between normal and night vision mode a bunch of times, and hopefully it'll start working correctly. But the colors look fine in normal mode, but there is no image stabilization, and it has a fixed focus lens with no macro mode, so anything closer than about 1.5 feet away from the lens will become blurry, so you cannot do close-ups with this camcorder. So this is 1080p 30 frames per second. This is 720p 30 frames per second. I don't know if you'll be able to tell any difference in quality between this and 1080p mode. And this is 720p 60 frames per second mode, although this video will only be uploaded in 30 frames per second. So here's my workbench. You can hardly see anything in normal mode, and I'll switch on the night vision mode, and you can see everything brightly illuminated by the infrared LEDs. And I'm really impressed with the night vision performance of this camcorder. It does very well, very much comparably to a Sony Handycam with night shot. So this is 1080p 30 frames per second in night vision. 720p 30 frames per second in night vision looks about the same. And 720p 60 frames per second looks a little bit darker and noticeably more grainy. So if you want to do night vision recordings, you really should stick to 30 frames per second. So again, in 1080p night vision, I'll switch it off. You can see absolutely nothing in normal mode. Switch it back to night vision, and you can see my furnace. Another scene in normal mode here. You can probably not even make out what's on this wall here until I turn on night vision. You can see my CDs. So that's working very well. And there are two ways to turn on night vision. You can click the button on the camcorder itself, but this camcorder records such quiet audio that I have to turn up the volume quite a bit just to hear it, and that also amplifies the sound of me clicking the button. So to avoid that noise in your recording, at least minimize it a little bit, you should press the indicator on the touchscreen. That way you don't get the noise of the button being pushed, although you still get the noise of the infrared blocking filter going in and out of the way. You can also use night vision in bright lighting, so this may be able to do so-called X-ray vision. So here's a brief example of what I call X-ray vision with these camcorders that can do night vision under normal lighting conditions. This is the same test I've done with a Sony night shot camera. You can refer to that video for comparison, although in that video I was using a black plastic bag instead of blue. But in normal mode, you probably cannot make out anything that's written on that CD with the bag covering it. But once I switch it into night vision and adjust the exposure a little bit, you can see the best of the animals written on that CD. It's even more clear if I reduce the exposure to -0.7. Normally whenever you switch on night vision, it automatically sets the exposure to +1, which may make things look overexposed a little bit. So I manually brought it down to -0.7, so then you can really see the difference with night vision turned on versus normal mode. Just a brief music test to see how the microphone quality is. So I'm really impressed with the night vision performance of this Sereer or Sere HDV-501. Very impressive night vision performance, though the microphone sucks. There's really no other way to describe it. It's very tinny and very quiet. When I'm editing this video, I'll have to bring up the volume a lot to make it comparable to the volume of this other camcorder I'm using to record this part of the video. So even though it has two microphone grills, it's only mono. and the quality is absolutely terrible. About as bad as that Bell & Howell DNV 16 HDZ camcorder I reviewed, although the night vision performance of this is much better than that. So if you don't really care that much about audio quality, this is a very good camcorder for night vision recording. You just have to keep in mind there's no image stabilization and no autofocus. But otherwise, does excellent job in night vision recording. And this is much less expensive than that Bell & Howell camcorder. I still think a Sony Handycam with night shot will do the best overall job with night vision recording, but if you can't find one of those at a good price, or you don't want to take a gamble with a used camcorder, this could be a very viable option for night vision recording.